There is a particular silence that arrives only at the top. A man sits in the corner office he spent 25 years earning. The city is laid out below him like a circuit board he finally learned to read. Every target he set at 30 has been hit. The title is on the door. The house has the view. The name is the one people drop to sound connected. And he is sitting very still at the end of an ordinary Tuesday, waiting to feel the thing he was promised would be waiting up here. The arrival, the rightness, the sense that all of it was worth it. He waits, and it does not come. What comes instead is a question so quiet and so total that he cannot say it out loud, because saying it would unmake everything. 3 words. Is this it? He is not depressed in any way a doctor could chart. Nothing is wrong. That is the horror of it. If something were wrong, he could fix it, because fixing things is the one skill he has filed to a perfect edge. But there is nothing to fix. The marriage is fine. The body still works. The bank account would let him stop tomorrow and never start again. And from inside all of that abundance, a cold wind is blowing through him that he has no name for and no spreadsheet to explain. He climbed the mountain. He planted the flag. And standing on the summit, in the photograph he was supposed to spend the rest of his life inside, he feels almost nothing at all. Carl Jung saw this exact man more often than any other, and he understood something that the man himself could not yet bear to know. The emptiness on the summit is not a malfunction. It is a message, and the reason the man feels nothing is not that he failed to climb high enough. It is that he climbed the wrong mountain, and the right one only becomes visible from the top of this one. That is the cruel and merciful design of it. You cannot see the second mountain until you have conquered the first. The achievement does not betray you. It promotes you to a question you were not allowed to ask until you'd won. By the end of this, you will understand why the strategy that built your entire life is the exact strategy that will quietly starve the rest of it. You will see what Jung meant when he said the afternoon of life cannot be lived by the program of the morning. You will recognize the cold wind for what it is, not a breakdown, but a summons. And you will meet the part of you that has been standing in the back of every victory, arms folded, waiting for you to finally turn around and ask what it actually wanted. But I have to warn you about the trap first, because almost everyone who feels this wind reaches for the wrong cure, and the wrong cure is what turns a doorway into a prison. If any of this is landing in your chest right now, I'd ask you to do one small thing before we go further. Leave a comment with the word you'd use for the wind, the feeling you can't quite name in the middle of a life that looks complete. Not for me, for you, so you can see it written down outside your own head. If this speaks to something you've been carrying, let that be your signal to stay. And if you know someone who has everything and somehow looks hollowed out by it, send this to them. Some people cannot hear this from a friend. They can only hear it from a stranger who isn't asking them for anything. So let me take you back to the beginning, because the man in the corner office did not start there. No one does. There is a first half of life, and it has a job. Jung was precise about this, more precise than almost anyone has been since. The first half of life is the work of building an ego strong enough to stand in the world. You arrive as a soft, formless thing, and you have to become someone. You have to separate from your parents, establish an identity, earn a place, secure a mate, prove you can survive without permission. This is enormous, necessary, holy work. The whole machinery of ambition exists to drive it, and the man in the corner office was a genius at it. He had to be. Somewhere far back, a boy learned that being impressive was the same thing as being safe, and he spent the next 4 decades becoming impressive with a focus that looked from the outside like greatness. Jung used a clean image for the two halves. He compared a human life to the course of the sun. In the morning, the sun rises, and every hour it climbs, it grows in strength and reach and heat, throwing its light wider across the world. This is the first half, the ascent, the conquest of the outer world, and the sun does not question its purpose at dawn. It simply climbs, because climbing is what the morning is for. The man climbed, he optimized, he learned the language of winning and spoke it without an accent. And here is what nobody tells you about being good at the morning. The better you are at it, the harder the noon, because the sun reaches a peak. And then Jung pointed out, something happens that the morning could never have predicted. The sun begins to descend, not as failure, as physics. The very light that spent all morning expanding outward now begins, hour by hour, to withdraw and turn inward, and the values that governed the climb reverse themselves completely. What was wisdom in the morning becomes folly in the afternoon. What was strength becomes a kind of arrogance. The man who keeps climbing after noon, who keeps applying the dawn's program to the afternoon sky, does not stay young. He becomes something worse. He becomes a person frozen at his own peak, repeating a victory that has stopped meaning anything, getting louder and emptier in exactly equal measure. This is what I'd call the noon reversal, and almost no one is warned about it. We are trained for the climb. The entire culture is a school for the morning. There are coaches and books and mentors for getting to the top. There is almost nothing for the strange, disorienting moment when you arrive and the ground tilts and the sun, against everything you were taught, starts going down. So you do the only thing you were ever trained to do. You assume the descent means you aren't climbing hard enough, and you climb harder. Watch what the man does next, because it is the trap, and it is so reasonable that you would do it too. He feels the cold wind. He cannot name it. And every instinct he has sharpened over a lifetime tells him the same thing the instinct always tells him. You are between goals. You need a bigger target. So he buys the faster car. He takes on the larger acquisition. He starts running marathons, or learning to fly, or pursuing a younger version of the recognition he already has. He does not stop to ask what the emptiness is. He treats the emptiness as a fuel gauge reading low and pours more of the same fuel into the tank, more mountain. The cure for too much summit, he decides, is another summit. And it works for a little while. The new target gives him somewhere to point the old engine. The wind dies down. He feels like himself again, which is to say, he feels like the morning. But the relief is alone, and the interest is brutal, because the second summit delivers exactly the same nothing the first one did, only faster, because now some part of him already suspected it would. This is what Jung warned about with such gravity. The man in the afternoon who refuses the afternoon does not find a second youth. He finds a treadmill that speeds up every year, and a horizon that empties out a little more with every flag he plants. He is trying to solve a spiritual problem with a logistical answer, and the spiritual problem, unanswered, does not go quiet. It goes underground. And what goes underground does not disappear. It waits, and it gathers weight, and it changes form. Jung had a private reason for understanding this so well, and it is worth telling because the man who mapped the second half of life nearly drowned in his own. In his late 30s, at the height of his powers, famous, the chosen heir to Freud, with a thriving practice and a fine house on the lake. Jung walked straight into his own noon, and the sun went down on him hard. The break with Freud cost him his standing, and underneath the professional rupture, something far larger gave way. He began to be flooded by images, voices, visions he could not control, a confrontation with the unconscious so total that he feared, for a time, that he was losing his mind. He had everything the first mountain offers, and it could not hold him up. What I find most important is what he did with it. He did not medicate it away or climb harder to outrun it. He descended into it, deliberately, on purpose, for years. He sat with the figures that rose in him and let them speak. And everything he gave the world afterward, every concept this entire series is built from, came out of that descent. The man who tells you the afternoon has its own work knew it because he very nearly died refusing his. There is a second figure I want you to meet, briefly, because the first mountain is not only built of corner offices, and I don't want any woman watching this to think the summons skips her. Picture a woman, late 40s, who poured the entire morning of her life into raising 3 children flawlessly. She was the mother everyone relied on, the one who never dropped anything, whose whole identity was the bottomless competence of giving. And then the last child leaves for university. The house goes quiet, and she stands in a kitchen that no longer needs her and feels the exact same cold wind the executive felt at the top of his tower. Her mountain was different. The emptiness is identical. She, too, hit every target the morning set and arrived at a silence she has no name for, because the role she perfected has just been completed and retired out from under her. The first mountain wears 1,000 faces: the corner office, the perfect family, the spotless reputation, the cause you gave your life to. The wind that comes when the climb is over does not care which one you chose. This is the part that almost no one is willing to sit with, so let me slow down here. The cold wind is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something. It is a part of you that has been waiting patiently in silence for the entire morning of your life. While the ego was out conquering, this other part was kept in a back room, fed nothing, allowed no vote. Everything that did not serve the climb was filed there. The questions that don't make money, the art you used to make, the friend you stopped calling because friendship is inefficient, the version of you that wanted to understand things rather than achieve them, the grief you never had time to feel, the faith you lost and never looked for. All of it, packed into a room you walked past every day for 30 years without opening the door. Jung had a way of describing this that I have never been able to forget. He said that what we do not bring to consciousness comes to us as fate. The room does not stay quiet forever. At some point, usually around the middle, the part you exiled to win starts knocking. And because you spent decades training yourself not to hear it, it cannot knock politely. It has to knock with the only language loud enough to reach you. It knocks as the cold wind, as the sudden meaninglessness of the thing you wanted most, as the affair that makes no sense, the rage at your own children, the bottle, the body that suddenly breaks down on schedule, the depression that arrives in a life with nothing to be depressed about. We call this a midlife crisis, as if it were an embarrassing weather event to be waited out. Jung saw it as something closer to a birth, a painful, involuntary, often humiliating attempt by the larger self to be born through the narrow opening of a life that was built too small. And notice where it knocks, not in your thoughts first, in your body. Jung was insistent on this, and every honest account of midlife confirms it. The room you starved announces itself through the flesh long before the mind will admit it. The chest that tightens for no reason in the middle of a meeting. The exhaustion that sleep does not touch because it is not your body that is tired. The strange physical dread that descends on a Sunday evening. The stomach that drops at the thought of Monday in a job you are objectively winning. The illness that arrives suspiciously. The same season you turn 50. The psyche speaks the only language the overmanaged mind cannot argue with. The language of the body, because the body cannot be optimized into silence. When you cannot name the wind, ask your shoulders. They have known for years. I'd call this the body's early warning. The dispatch the larger self sends when the ego has stopped taking calls. Most people spend a fortune trying to fix the messenger and never once read the message. The man in the corner office does not know any of this yet. He knows only that one morning he sat in his car in the parking garage of his own building, hands on the wheel, engine off, and could not make himself walk inside, not from fear, from a kind of refusal he didn't authorize. Some part of him had simply sat down in the road and would not move. He sat there for 40 minutes. He told no one. Then on the drive home that night, for the first time in years, he turned the radio off and let the silence in, and the silence said the 3 words again. Is this it? Only this time, very faintly, underneath them, he heard something he had not heard before. A second voice, not asking, answering, no, this is not it. And you have always known that. That second voice is what I want to talk about now, because everything turns on it. Jung believed that the center of who you are is not the ego. The ego, that busy, anxious manager that spent the whole morning climbing, is real and necessary, but it is not the king it thinks it is. Behind it, beneath it, vastly larger than it, is what Jung called the self, the total personality, the deep center that contains not just who you have been, but everything you have not yet become. And the second half of life has one essential task, the task the whole machinery of midlife exists to force. The ego has to stop being the center and start being in relationship with that larger self. The little king has to discover he was always a servant. This is the great reversal. In the morning, you build the ego. In the afternoon, you are asked to dethrone it, gently, before it dethrones you violently. This is why the achievements turn to ash, and it is not a punishment. The achievements were the ego's project, and the ego's project is complete. You did it. There is nothing wrong with the trophies. The horror you feel looking at them is simply the larger self informing you in the only way it can, that they were never the point. They were the tuition. You paid an enormous price to learn that the thing you thought you wanted does not fill the space it was supposed to fill. And that lesson, brutal as it is the doorway. The emptiness of the first mountain is the only thing that can make you turn and finally see the second. So what is the second mountain? This is where people want a clean answer, and Jung refused to give one, because the whole nature of the second half is that the answer cannot be handed to you. The first mountain is collective. Everyone agrees on what it is: money, status, the corner office, the markers the tribe hands out. You can climb it by following directions. The second mountain is yours alone, and no one can tell you where it stands, because it is made of exactly the things your particular soul exiled to win the first. For one person, it is the relationships they sacrificed to the career. For another, it is the creative life they amputated at 22. For another, it is a confrontation with meaning itself, with mortality, with the question of what they actually believe now that no one is grading them. The second mountain is built from your own unlived life. That is why no coach can sell you the map. The map is buried in the room you stopped opening. And here is where it goes deeper than midlife, deeper than the executive, all the way down to the room you had no power to leave. Because the first mountain is almost never the one you actually chose. Look closely at the summit any person spends their morning climbing, and you will usually find, at its base, a child trying to win something that had nothing to do with mountains. The man in the corner office did not love status for its own sake. Somewhere far back there was a father who only looked up from the newspaper when there was an achievement to report, and a boy who learned that love arrived on the same train as accomplishment and never otherwise. So he built a life designed to keep that train running forever. The woman in the quiet kitchen learned, just as young, that her worth was the care she could provide, that she was loved for her usefulness, and she chose a mountain that would let her be endlessly, perfectly useful until the day it left. We do not pick the first mountain freely. We are handed it, in childhood, by the people whose approval we could not live without. The morning's whole ferocious climb is very often a grown adult still trying to finally satisfy a parent who is, by now, old, or changed, or gone. This is what makes the cold wind so disorienting. It is not only telling you that the achievements are empty, it is telling you that the contract was never yours to begin with, that you have spent decades fulfilling terms you signed before you could read them. And that is a hard thing to forgive yourself for, so let me reframe it before it curdles. You were not a fool. You were loyal. You were loyal to a strategy that genuinely worked once, that genuinely earned you the safety and the love you needed when you were small and had no other way to get it. The strategy was not a mistake. It was survival itself. It simply finished its job a long time ago, and no one rang the bell. The afternoon is the bell. If this is the part that just landed hardest, write it in the comments, not as blame and not as a wound, but as a fact you're finally allowed to see. I have been climbing someone else's mountain, saying it does not undo the climb. It just hands you back the next choice, which has, at last, your own name on it. Let me give the man a few more steps, because I don't want to leave him stranded in the garage. He does not have an epiphany. People expect midlife transformation to arrive like a lightning strike, and it almost never does. What happens to him is smaller and stranger. He starts, without quite deciding to, doing useless things. He buys a notebook and writes in it at night, badly, things he would be ashamed to show anyone. He takes a different route home and finds himself parked outside the music school he attended as a boy, the one he quit when his father explained that music was not a serious life. He sits with his teenage son in a way he has not before, not managing him, not optimizing him, just sitting, and finds the boy looking at him strangely, as though a stranger had taken his father's chair and turned out to be kinder. None of it is productive. All of it makes the cold wind somehow warmer. He is, without the words for it, beginning to feed the room he starved. And here is the part that surprises him most. The part Jung documented again and again in the men and women who came to him at exactly this stage. The descent does not make him weaker. It makes him deeper. The light that spent all morning racing outward begins to turn back inward, and as it does, it illuminates rooms in him that the climbing light never reached. He becomes, for the first time, interesting to himself. The terror of meaninglessness, which he was trying to outrun, turns out to be the entrance to meaning, because meaning was never going to be found in another acquisition. It was waiting in the very dark he was sprinting away from. The afternoon has its own light. It is lower and longer, and it shows you the shape of things the noon glare burned out. But I have to be honest about the cost, because the style of this whole series is to refuse the easy version, and this is no exception. Turning toward the second mountain will make you, for a while, worse at the first. This is not a side effect. It is the price. The man who stops pouring all of himself into the climb will, predictably, climb less impressively. Colleagues will notice the change, and most of them will not approve, because the system that profited from his relentless morning has no use for his afternoon. Some people in his life loved him specifically for the parts he is now setting down, and they will grieve or punish him or quietly leave. The marriage that was built on two people performing the morning together may not survive one of them turning toward dusk. Jung never pretended this was painless. The dethroning of the ego is experienced by the ego as a death, and it fights, because dying is its least favorite thing. There will be nights when the second mountain looks like nothing more than the wreckage of the first, and you will not be sure you have transformed or simply quit. This is the trap inside the trap, and I'd ask you to hold this one carefully. The danger at midlife is not only refusing the descent, it is also mistaking collapse for descent. There is a false version of the second mountain, where a person uses the language of meaning and depth to simply blow up a life they found inconvenient, abandon the people they're responsible to, and call their selfishness a spiritual awakening. The cold wind has been used to justify a great deal of cruelty. Jung's path was never about escape. The afternoon does not ask you to flee the morning's life. It asks you to bring the unlived parts of yourself back into the life you actually have, to repair and deepen and reimagine it from the inside, not to torch it and run. The genuine second mountain is usually quieter and more demanding than the dramatic exit. It asks you to stay and to become real where you already stand. If your version of awakening requires that everyone else pay the bill, it is not the self speaking. It is the ego in a new costume, and the costume is the most convincing one it owns. Jung noticed one more thing about the second half, and it is the part most likely to make a modern, rational person flinch, so I'll say it plainly. He found, in case after case, that the people who navigated the afternoon well were almost always the ones who recovered some genuine relationship to meaning larger than themselves. He was careful here, careful in a way I want to honor. He was not prescribing a church or a creed. He spent his life studying the religious instinct as a fact of the psyche, not as a doctrine to be sold. But he observed, again and again, that the first mountain runs on the ego's fuel, which is purpose, the next goal, the next win, and that this fuel does not exist on the second mountain at all. The afternoon runs on a different fuel entirely, and that fuel is meaning. The morning asks what you can achieve. The afternoon asks what your one life is for, what you are in service to, what would still matter on the day none of the achievements can be added to. Jung found that the patients who could not even ask that question, who had no relationship to anything larger than their own ambition, were the ones who aged into bitterness and dread. The unlived life does not only contain your exiled talents, it contains your exiled depth, the part of you that needs to belong to something it did not build and cannot control. This is the symbolic life, and it is the steepest and least visible part of the second mountain. It is the recovery of awe, of ritual, of a sense that your days are part of a story older and larger than your resume. For some people, it is a return to a faith they abandoned in the morning as childish, only to discover, in the afternoon, that they had thrown out something they now badly need. For others, it is found in nature, in art, in the simple practice of sitting still long enough to feel that you are held by something. Jung was not sentimental about this. He simply reported what he saw across 40 years of the most thorough work anyone has done on the human interior. The second half of life goes well for the ones who let their lives mean something beyond their own striving. It goes badly for the ones who try to spend the afternoon polishing the morning's trophies, asking a God-shaped hunger to be satisfied by a slightly larger title. So how do you tell the difference? How do you know whether the wind is summoning you to grow or simply tempting you to flee? Jung's answer was not a rule, but a direction. The summons toward the self always asks you to become more whole, which means more, not less. It asks you to take back the exiled parts and integrate them, to hold the achievements and the meaning together, the responsibility and the freedom together, the morning and the afternoon in one larger life. The false version always asks you to amputate again, to trade one half for the other, to be the artist instead of the provider, the free spirit instead of the husband, as if you still had to choose. Wholeness adds. Escape subtracts. When you are deciding what the wind is asking, ask which direction the answer points, toward more of yourself, held together, or toward another room slammed shut. Let me bring the man back one last time, because we left him with a notebook and a strange new silence, and I owe you the rest. The woman in the quiet kitchen found her own afternoon, and it looked nothing like a triumph. She did not reinvent herself into a brand or discover, at 49, that she had been an entrepreneur all along. What happened to her was smaller and truer. She enrolled in a single evening class on a subject that had nothing to do with anyone needing her, art history, a thing she had wanted at 20 and surrendered to the morning. She was bad at it and did not care. She started keeping a journal she had no intention of showing her children. She let some friendships that had only ever been about her usefulness fall quietly away, and let a few new ones in that wanted nothing from her but her company. The competence that had defined her did not vanish. It just stopped being the whole of her. She discovered, slowly, that she was a person and not only a function, and the kitchen that had felt like a tomb became, again, just a room in a house where someone interesting happened to live. The empty nest was never the end of her purpose. It was the first time her purpose was allowed to be her own. It is years later. He is still, mostly, in the same life. From the outside, very little has changed. Same house, same family, a somewhat smaller title because he stepped back from the thing that was eating him. The flag still flies on the first mountain. He just no longer lives up there. He goes back to it the way you visit a place you used to live, with a certain fondness and no desire to move back in. The notebook became a habit, then a practice, then a way of listening to the second voice that he no longer needs the garage to hear. The relationship with his son is real now, built in all those useless, unoptimized hours. He plays music, badly, alone, and it feeds him more than any acquisition ever did. And the cold wind, the one he could not name, the one he tried to outrun with bigger summits, has not gone away. He stopped wanting it to. He understands now that it was never an enemy. It was the deepest part of him, knocking, the way a lighthouse knocks against the fog, telling him there was a shore. He sits, sometimes, in the same corner office at the end of an ordinary Tuesday, the city laid out below like a circuit board, and the three words still come. Is this it? But they have changed their meaning entirely. They are no longer the cry of a man trapped on the wrong peak. They are the genuine, open question of someone who has learned that life in the afternoon is not a problem to be solved, but a road still being walked, with so much of it left. Is this it? No, there is more. There is always more, as long as you are willing to keep turning inward toward the part of you that has not yet been lived. So if you are standing on your own summit right now, in a life that looks complete from every angle and feels strangely hollow from the inside, I want you to hear the cold wind correctly, maybe for the first time. You did not fail. You succeeded so completely that you used up the morning's questions and arrived early at the afternoons. The emptiness you feel is not the absence of a life. It is the pressure of a larger one trying to be born. The mountain you climbed was not a waste. It was the only thing tall enough to let you see the next one. And the part of you that has been standing at the back of every victory with its arms folded was never your enemy. It was the self you were too busy to become, waiting with terrible patience for you to finally turn around. The afternoon of life cannot be lived by the program of the morning. What got you here will not take you home. But the descent is not the end of the journey. It is the half of it you were never told about. The half where the light turns inward and finally shows you who was climbing all along. And there is still, I promise you, so much road. If this reached something in you, write 3 words in the comments, not as a complaint and not as a confession, but as a line you're holding yourself to from here. The second mountain is mine. Carry it like a vow, because that is what it is. And if you want to keep walking this descent with me, the next door in this series goes deeper still into the strange truth that the breakdown you are fighting with everything you have may be the very thing trying to save you. I think you're ready for it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.